It was another quiet night at the medical warehouse. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting long, stiff shadows across the rows of shelves stacked with boxes and equipment. Outside, the wind whispered through empty streets, but inside, the silence was almost heavier than the cold. For the night shift worker, this had always been routine: long hours alone, checking inventory, keeping the place running until morning. But that night, something felt different. At exactly 2 a.m., as he walked toward the front entrance to double-check the locks, his stomach tightened. The door, always securely locked at this hour, was slightly ajar and just a sliver, barely enough to see the dark outline of the outside. He frowned. He had locked it himself before starting his shift. There was no way it could have opened on its own. The cold draft that slipped through the crack made the hair on his neck stand up. He stepped closer, his footsteps echoing softly across the concrete floor. Each tap of his shoes seemed unnaturally loud in the empty space, and the hum of the refrigerators in the back sounded deeper, almost like the building itself was holding its breath. He reached for the handle, expecting the door to be stubborn, but it moved easily in his hand. He shoved it closed and turned the key in the lock, listening as it clicked into place. For a moment, everything seemed normal again. But then, a sound drifted from somewhere behind him. A soft, deliberate tap, like a footfall against concrete. He froze, heart racing. The warehouse should have been empty. There was no one else here. No co-workers, no security staff, just him. He slowly turned his head, scanning the dimly lit aisles, his eyes straining against the shadows. The sound came again. Footsteps slow measured, and they weren't echoing from the front door where he had just locked it. They were coming from deeper inside, from a section that should have been completely deserted. A chill ran down his spine. He called out, his voice breaking slightly. "Hello? Is someone there?" The sound of his own voice seemed to vanish in the cavernous space, swallowed by the silence. There was no answer and just the soft thud of footsteps moving closer. He swallowed hard, telling himself it had to be a rat, or maybe a loose box shifting under the hum of the refrigeration units. But instinct screamed at him. This was no animal. It was something else, and something that shouldn't be there. The air felt thicker, heavier, pressing down on him like the building it was closing in. Every shadow seemed to shift when he blinked, every corner promising a glimpse of something that wasn't supposed to exist. He took a cautious step forward, trying to steady his breathing, trying to convince himself it was nothing. But the footsteps followed closer now and faster. He could feel the warehouse vibrating with the rhythm of them, though no one was in sight. Panic started to creep in. This wasn't just a forgotten lock or a simple creak of the building settling. Someone or something was moving inside, and it was moving toward him. His palms were sweaty against the cold metal of the box he had picked up for protection. His mind raced through every possible explanation, but the sinking feeling in his gut told him the truth. Something was in the warehouse, and it was watching, waiting. He tried to shake off the dread tightening around his chest, telling himself he was imagining it. Maybe it was the echo of his own footsteps, or the creak of the building settling. But the moment he stepped further into the warehouse, the sound returned, soft at first, almost hesitant, but unmistakably deliberate. Footsteps behind him, slow, deliberate steps on the concrete floor, just like his own. His heart pounded so loud it felt like it could drown out every other sound, yet he could still hear the quiet rhythm following him. He stopped and turned slowly, straining his eyes across the aisles lined with stacked boxes and shelves. Shadows stretched and twisted under the flickering fluorescent lights. Nothing moved. No shape. No figure. Just darkness and the faint hum of the freezers at the back. He called out again, his voice louder this time, cracking with nervous energy. "Hello? Who's there?" Silence, just silence. Then the steps got closer. He could hear the faint scraping of shoes on concrete, soft but precise, almost as if someone was intentionally tracking his every move. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he knew the warehouse too well. The aisles and storage racks were a maze, and any misstep could leave him cornered. He moved cautiously, inching toward the middle of the building, trying to see if he could catch a glimpse of whoever or whatever was following him. A shelf rattled in the distance. A box teetered on the edge, falling with a hollow thud that made him jump. His breathing was shallow and rapid, matching the rhythm of the footsteps behind him. Though each time he spun around, there was nothing there. The warehouse felt alive now. The shadows seemed to stretch toward him, reaching across the aisles, and every noise, every tap, every creak, echoed unnaturally loud in the cavernous space. The footsteps followed relentlessly, echoing, circling, always just behind him, never revealing them. His skin crawled with the sensation of being watched. The air seemed thicker here, heavier, filled with a silence so oppressive that even the hum of the freezers sounded distant, like it belonged to another world. Panic began to rise. He thought about running to the front door, but the thought of those footsteps following him across the open floor made him hesitate. He wasn't just hearing someone. He could feel the presence closing in, circling him, and probing the warehouse for a weakness. Every instinct in his body screamed that this wasn't just a trespasser. It was something more, and something patient, calculating, waiting for him to make a wrong move. He tried to calm himself, telling himself to stay rational, to keep his mind focused. But the fear had a hold on him now, clutching his chest like icy hands. The footsteps grew louder, sharper, more confident. Each step was a silent warning, a signal that he was being hunted. He realized he needed to find a safe spot, somewhere secure, before it was too late. But where could he hide in a warehouse this big, with the intruder already inside? The shadows seemed to move with him now, stretching and bending in ways that made him doubt his own eyes. Every corner, every aisle could be hiding something sinister, just waiting for him to take the next step. The warehouse suddenly felt smaller, more suffocating. Every aisle he passed seemed longer, the shadows deeper, darker, curling around him as if alive. The footsteps weren't just following anymore. They were closing in, moving with purpose, like a predator stalking its prey. His heart raced, each beat pounding against his ribs as adrenaline surged through his body. He tried to steady his breathing, telling himself to stay calm, but calmness had no place here. Not when something unseen was circling, hunting him through the silent maze of shelves and boxes. He broke into a slow run, feet thudding against the cold concrete, echoing back in a distorted rhythm. The footsteps mirrored him now, matching every step, never faltering, never revealing them. Panic clawed at his mind. Boxes rattled nearby, and he swore he saw shadows move at the corner of his vision, twisting in impossible ways. Every instinct screamed at him to keep moving, to find a locked room, a safe place where he could hide until help arrived. But the warehouse was enormous, a labyrinth of metal shelves and storage crates, and the intruder seemed to know it better than he did. His hands were trembling as he clutched a metal pipe for protection, though he knew it was useless against whatever was following him. The footsteps were closer now, louder, and more insistent. Every sound in the warehouse, clanging carts, falling boxes, the hum of the freezers, mixed into a symphony of terror that made it impossible to tell what was real and what was imagined. The shadows themselves seemed to twist with intention, elongating toward him, as if the darkness itself were reaching out. He darted around a corner, nearly tripping over a pallet of boxes. The footsteps echoed directly behind him, faster now, urgent. He could feel the presence moving just beyond the shelves, unseen but tangible. The air was thick, stifling, and the metallic scent of the warehouse mixed with the icy grip of fear that held his body in place. Every nerve screamed that if he slowed down for even a second, he would be caught. Every instinct told him to keep moving, to survive. As he ran, he glanced toward the back of the warehouse, the only place he could think of that offered a door he could lock. It was far, but it was his only option. His breath came in ragged gasps, heart hammering in his chest like a drum. He could hear the intruder now, not just footsteps, but the faint scraping of a doorknob somewhere behind him, a soft, deliberate sound that made his blood run cold. The realization hit him. This was no ordinary intruder. Whoever or whatever was in the warehouse knew him, knew the layout, knew exactly where he was. Fear transformed into sheer terror as he pushed toward the back room, adrenaline making his legs move faster than they ever had. Shadows shifted around him, corners seemed to close in, and every sound, the scrape of a shelf, the clatter of a falling box, felt like a direct threat. The footsteps behind him grew louder, the rhythm accelerating, echoing the pounding of his own heartbeat. His mind screamed, warning him, begging him to hurry. He had to reach that locked room before it was too late. He slammed the back door behind him, the cold metal frame rattling under his trembling hands. He twisted the lock and pressed himself against it, heart hammering so hard he was sure the intruder could hear it. The warehouse was now a distant memory. The safe illusion of this tiny, cramped room was all that separated him from the horror that stalked the aisles just moments before. His breaths came in sharp, uneven gasps, each exhale filling the room with the sound of panic. Every nerve in his body screamed that he wasn't truly safe. The darkness beyond the door felt alive, pressing against the thin walls as though it could slip through the slightest crack. Then he heard it, the first unmistakable sound of someone or something on the other side. A soft scrape against the doorknob, deliberate and patient, sent a jolt through his spine. He froze, every muscle locked in place, barely daring to breathe. The sound came again, followed by the metallic thud of a kick against the door. The lock shuddered under the force, and he felt the vibration travel through his feet, rattling the small metal shelving he leaned against for support. Panic surged. This wasn't random. Whoever it was, they were trying to get in. They were relentless. He pressed his back against the wall, trying to make himself smaller, hoping to become invisible. His phone trembled in his hand as he dialed 911, fingers shaking so badly it took 3 attempts just to press the numbers. When the dispatcher answered, he could barely get the words out, whispering into the receiver, "Please, someone's in the warehouse. They're trying to get in." The line crackled, and for a terrifying moment, he thought he heard a faint whisper on the other end, though it could have been his imagination. The intruder's breathing, deep, deliberate, echoed through the thin door, punctuated by sudden kicks that made his stomach lurch. Every second stretched into eternity. The footsteps that had haunted him through the warehouse were now outside, pounding and scraping, testing the door, probing for weaknesses. Each thud reverberated through his chest. The sound of someone breathing, close, heavy, and steady, sent waves of fear that made his vision blur. He wanted to scream, to run, to somehow escape, but he was trapped. The realization hit him with full force. There was nowhere to go, and whoever was out there didn't need to chase him anymore. They only needed to wait. Time slowed. He counted the moments between each kick, each scrape. 1, 2, 3. And the sound came again. The doorknob rattled violently this time, and he pressed his back harder against the wall, heart threatening to burst from his chest. He couldn't see them. He couldn't hear footsteps moving away. Just the static, relentless presence right outside. Sweat ran down his face, his fingers gripping the phone until the plastic edges bit into his palms. He whispered frantic prayers, desperate for someone, anyone, to arrive. The warehouse that had once been his workplace had transformed into a cage, the shadows around the door stretching and twisting as if they themselves were alive, pressing closer with every heartbeat. And then, through the panic, through the relentless pounding, he realized something terrifying. Even if he survived tonight, the memory of those steps, that breathing, that sound of the door being kicked over and over again, would never leave him. It was a night designed to haunt not just his body, but his mind. Every sound, every shadow, every silent pause beyond that door would echo in his nightmares for the rest of his life. His hands shook violently as he held the phone to his ear, listening to the calm, measured voice of the 911 operator. Every word of reassurance sounded distant, muffled, as if it came from another world. Outside, the pounding against the door didn't stop. Kick after kick, the intruder tested the lock, each one sending shudders through the walls, rattling the small metal shelves around him. The breathing on the other side was deliberate, heavy, and terrifyingly close. He pressed himself tighter against the corner of the room, wishing for invisibility, wishing that somehow the darkness itself would swallow him. "Please hurry," he whispered into the phone, voice breaking. "Someone's inside. They know I'm here. They're trying to." The words caught in his throat as the doorknob rattled again. He could feel the intruder's presence, a pressure through the wood, like they were pressing into his chest without entering the room. Each second stretched endlessly. He imagined the shadow beyond the door, pacing, watching, and calculating every move he made. The calm voice on the other end told him to stay quiet, stay hidden, and remain on the line. But staying quiet was impossible. His heart thundered like a drum, echoing in his ears, threatening to betray his position with every frantic beat. The pounding continued, relentless, and then silence. Just for a second, enough for him to think the intruder had moved on. His body trembled violently as he listened. Then, a soft scrape of movement along the warehouse floor, closer now, circling the room, made his stomach drop. He could hear the faint sound of a fence somewhere outside, the same rhythm of a person moving cautiously, trying to find an exit. The realization hit him. The intruder wasn't just inside. They were planning their escape, but they didn't want to be seen or caught yet. Sirens pierced the night, faint at first, growing louder with every passing moment. Relief surged through him, but it was laced with fear. Any second, the intruder could turn back toward him. He whispered to the dispatcher, "They're going. They're leaving. Please hurry." The pounding at the door grew desperate for a moment, and then, just as suddenly, it stopped. He held his breath, straining to hear anything through the thin walls. Outside, footsteps moved over gravel and metal. He realized, trembling, that the intruder had been caught between escaping and being trapped, forced to make a desperate move. Moments later, police arrived in force. Flashing lights illuminated the warehouse exterior, casting long, jagged shadows through the small windows of the back room. Voices shouted commands, radios crackled, and the sounds of officers moving quickly and carefully filled the space outside. The pounding had ceased, but his ears still rang with the memory of it. Eventually, a man was apprehended, caught sneaking through the fence, just as the dispatcher had assured him the authorities would. His body slumped against the wall in exhausted relief, but the terror didn't vanish. The knowledge that someone had been inside, unseen, stalking him through the vast empty warehouse, lingered like a dark stain on his mind. Even after the intruder was gone, even after the officers assured him it was safe, the warehouse felt different. The air seemed heavier, the shadows longer, every creak of the building amplified. He sat in the small room, clutching his phone, realizing that surviving the night didn't erase what had happened. The presence he had felt, the deliberate footsteps, the patient breathing, the pounding on the door, was etched into his memory. It was a night designed to stay with him, a nightmare that had walked the line between reality and terror, leaving him shaken, haunted, and unable to forget. The intruder was caught, the police had taken their statements, and the warehouse was officially secure. But for the night shift worker, the terror didn't end when the flashing lights of patrol cars faded into the distance. Every corner of the warehouse seemed different now, heavier somehow, shadows lingering longer than they should. The echo of footsteps, that deliberate, patient rhythm, haunted the empty aisles even when no one was there. He walked slowly, checking locks, scanning the shelves, but the building felt alive, as though it had absorbed the fear and was now keeping it. The next night, he returned to work, but the sense of unease was immediate. The familiar fluorescent lights flickered in ways that made him jump, and every metallic clang, every distant hum of the freezers, seemed sharper, louder, and more sinister. His hands instinctively went to the locks on every door, checking them twice, 3 times. Shadows twisted across the floor in ways that made his stomach tighten. Even standing in the center of a well-lit aisle, he felt eyes on him. He wasn't sure if it was paranoia or a lingering presence, but the fear was undeniable, gripping him the way it had the night before. Every small sound set his nerves on edge. The squeak of a cart, the distant echo of a box falling, even the wind brushing against the metal doors. everything made him flinch. He kept glancing at the back room where he had locked himself in, imagining the face of the intruder behind the door, imagining the breathing and the kicks. Though the police had caught the man, the memory of that night had left a permanent mark. He realized that surviving an attack didn't erase it. The fear lingered, waiting in quiet moments, waiting to spring back at the slightest sound. Sleep was impossible. His dreams were haunted by the echo of footsteps on concrete, doors rattling under invisible force, and the sensation of being stalked through endless dark aisles. Even in daylight, his mind replayed the events in vivid detail. The open door, the soft steps behind him, the panic as he sprinted to the back room. The incident became a permanent scar on his psyche. He couldn't shake the feeling that the warehouse had changed, that the night had opened a door not just to a real intruder, but to a lingering presence that might return. The story of that night spread slowly among colleagues, whispered with caution. People spoke of it as a terrifying but isolated incident, a moment of luck, a near tragedy narrowly avoided. But the worker knew the truth. What he had experienced went beyond simple crime or mischief. Something had entered the warehouse that night, unseen, patient, and relentless. And even though the man was caught, the memory remained, haunting him in every silent corner, in every shadow, in every moment of quiet that reminded him of those footsteps and the pounding on the door. He realized, with chilling clarity, that sometimes fear doesn't leave when danger is gone. It lingers, waiting for the next moment of vulnerability, feeding on your memories, and never truly letting you feel safe again. Days turned into weeks, but the warehouse never felt the same. The night shift worker returned to his routine, but the oppressive sense of being watched lingered. Every creak of the building, every whisper of wind through cracks in the walls, made him flinch. Shadows seemed to stretch and shift in impossible ways, and sometimes he could swear he heard soft footsteps echoing behind him, even when he was the only one inside. He tried to tell himself it was paranoia, that the fear was just a remnant of what had happened. But the memory was too vivid, too real. The pounding on the backroom door, the deliberate breathing, the scraping of shoes across concrete. It haunted him. He avoided certain aisles, places where the darkness felt thickest, where the air seemed colder. The warehouse, once just a workplace, had become a place of caution, of lingering dread. The man the police had caught was only part of the story. What remained was the knowledge that the intruder had moved silently through the space, unseen, waiting, observing. And that knowledge had left an imprint that no lock, no door, no patrol could erase. Even the daylight hours offered no relief. Every time he approached the front door, he instinctively checked it twice, 3 times, remembering the first moment he saw it ajar. The fear of being alone, of being vulnerable, never fully left him. Sleep offered little solace. Dreams were vivid and terrifying. Endless hallways of the warehouse, dark corners where shadows moved of their own accord, footsteps echoing closer and closer. Sometimes he awoke, heart racing, convinced he could hear the intruder returning. The same rhythmic steps, the same soft breathing. His mind refused to accept safety as real. He realized that some horrors don't end when danger leaves. They stay in your memory, lingering, waiting for the moment to return. Even friends and family noticed a change. His voice would tremble when recounting what happened. His eyes darted nervously at the slightest sound. Though outwardly calm during the day, he carried the night's terror like a weight. The warehouse had left its mark, a reminder that some places, and some nights, are never truly empty. He could no longer tell which shadows were ordinary and which were echoes of that night. Every creak, every groan of the building, every soft step in the silence threatened to awaken the terror he had barely survived. The story ends not with resolution, but with lingering dread. Footsteps and door kicks may have stopped, but their echo remains. And for anyone working alone, in a silent, empty space late at night, the question lingers. If those shadows move, if those footsteps return, will you be ready? The warehouse may be empty, but the fear is permanent, etched into every corner, every shadow, and every heartbeat that dares to disturb the silence. Some nights never truly end, and some footsteps never truly stop. The hotel stood silent under the cold glow of the streetlights. Its brick walls, worn and cracked, whispered the weight of decades gone by. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of dust and polish, a strange mix that made the air feel heavier than usual. The night shift worker, a young man who had worked here for months, walked through the entrance, jingling the front desk keys in his hand. He had never believed in ghosts. He laughed at the stories the locals told about this place. Stories about shadows moving on their own, guests who vanished, and strange faces glimpsed in security cameras that no one could identify. Yet tonight, as he stepped across the worn floor, a chill ran down his spine that no heater could chase away. It was nearly 2 in the morning. The hotel was almost empty. Most of the rooms had long been closed for renovations, or so he thought. He walked toward the desk, setting down his bag. The silence was thick, almost alive. Then, a soft tapping sound echoed from the far hallway. He froze. The sound wasn't loud, but it was deliberate footsteps. But no one should be here. His hand shook slightly as he reached for the desk phone, a sense of unease creeping into his chest. The lobby clock ticked loudly, each second feeling heavier than the last. He brushed off the feeling, telling himself it was just the old building settling. Minutes passed. Then the bell above the front door jingled. A man stepped in, tall, thin, wearing a dark coat despite the warmth of the building. His face was pale, almost too pale, and his eyes held a strange emptiness. "I have a reservation," the man said quietly. The worker nodded, flipping through the logbook. The name was there, but something was wrong. The handwriting wasn't familiar. It looked old, almost faded, as if written long ago. He glanced at the security monitors behind him. Nothing, no one had entered. The front doors hadn't opened. Yet there the man stood, waiting. The air grew colder, the hum of the heater seeming louder, as if the building itself was breathing around him. The worker's heart began to race. He wanted to speak, to ask the guest to wait a moment, but his voice caught in his throat. The man's gaze stayed fixed on him, unblinking, unmoving. The shadows in the corners of the lobby seemed to stretch toward the figure. The worker's rational mind searched for an explanation. Perhaps it was a prank. Perhaps he was imagining it. But deep inside, a feeling he couldn't name told him this was no ordinary guest. The hotel, with its long history of accidents and whispered haunting, suddenly felt alive in a way he had never noticed before. And tonight it had noticed him. The old hotel had a story that most visitors never knew. Years ago, during its construction, a worker had fallen from the scaffolding, dying instantly. Locals whispered that his spirit never left. Over the decades, more strange incidents were reported. Guests claimed they saw fleeting shadows in hallways, heard faint footsteps in empty corridors, and felt sudden chills in rooms that had been closed for months. Online forums were filled with theories, videos, and grainy photos that no one could fully explain. Many dismissed them as hoaxes, but some stories carried a weight that made even skeptics pause. Tonight, the worker finally understood why. The guest at the desk hadn't moved. The worker tried to look away, pretending to check the logbook, but a cold draft swept across the lobby, raising goosebumps on his arms. The air felt thicker, as if it carried a presence he couldn't see. Every instinct screamed at him to step back, but his feet seemed glued to the floor. The guest's voice was soft, but it seemed to echo unnaturally, as if more than one presence spoke at the same time. The worker felt a weight pressing down on his chest. Something wasn't right. The hotel, with its peeling wallpaper and flickering lights, felt alive, watching, waiting. He tried to remind himself that he didn't believe in ghosts. But then he remembered the cameras. Security footage had recorded things that no one could explain. Guests appeared in frames and vanished without a trace. Shadows moved in ways that defied logic. Staff who had worked the night shift for years reported hearing voices in empty rooms, feeling hands brush past them when no one was there. And now, standing face to face with the man at the desk, the worker felt the creeping certainty that some of these stories were true. The hotel's past wasn't just history. It was still here, wrapping itself around every wall, every hallway, and every flickering light. As the guest handed over a card for the reservation, the worker's hand trembled. Something about the card seemed off. It was worn, old, yet the printing was strangely clear. The man's eyes never blinked, never wavered. Shadows shifted behind him, forming shapes that seemed almost human, but impossible. The worker realized he was alone, yet surrounded. His rational mind fought to explain the sensation, but the air itself felt thick with an unseen presence. Every instinct screamed for him to leave, but the hotel seemed to mock him, holding him in place. And in that moment, the worker knew that tonight, the hotel would reveal itself in ways he had never imagined. The lobby was silent again, but the silence felt different now, heavier, almost suffocating. The worker tried to focus on his task, flipping through the reservation book, but every few seconds, he thought he heard a soft footstep behind him. He spun around, but the hallways were empty. The old chandeliers above flickered, casting irregular shadows across the walls. The faint smell of dust and polish now carried something else, something metallic like the tang of blood in the air. His stomach twisted with unease. Then it happened. From the far end of the corridor, a door creaked slowly. He froze, heart hammering. There shouldn't have been anyone in that wing. No guest, no staff, nothing. Yet the sound persisted, a rhythmic, deliberate movement as though someone, or something, was pacing back and forth. He whispered, "Hello." No answer came, only the faint echo of steps growing closer. His breath quickened. Rational thought began to crumble. The shadows seemed to move independently, stretching along the walls and ceiling, reaching toward him in unnatural ways. The front desk phone rang suddenly, startling him. He fumbled to answer, but the line was dead, just static, followed by a faint whisper that made his blood run cold. He could barely understand it, but it sounded like a voice saying, "Leave, now." Panic surged through him. He looked up at the security monitors. For the first time, he saw something he couldn't explain. A shadowy figure appeared in the main hallway. It lingered there for a moment, motionless, before disappearing entirely. Yet, the hallways outside the camera feed were empty. Nothing had moved. No door had opened. The air itself seemed to pulse with energy, a heavy, suffocating presence pressing against him. Desperate for answers, he stepped toward the corridor to investigate, but his own shadow seemed to lag behind, twisting unnaturally on the floor. The faint sound of laughter, or was it crying, echoed from a room at the end of the hall. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end and the building itself groaned, as though aware of his fear, amplifying every sound, every whisper, every shadow. Something was there. He didn't know what, but he knew he was no longer alone. The night had shifted, and the hotel was showing him a side it had hidden for decades. A side meant only for those who stayed after dark. By now, the worker felt the hotel closing in around him. Every step he took seemed to echo far too loudly, bouncing off the empty walls and stretching the silence into something unbearable. The lobby lights flickered violently, plunging the room into brief moments of darkness, only to flare back on, illuminating the same hallway that had been empty a second before. Each time the lights returned, he could swear the shadows had shifted slightly, growing longer, darker, stretching toward him like they were alive. The air grew icy, searing cold against his skin, and the old heater wheezed as if struggling to keep the temperature normal, but failing entirely. He tried to focus on the desk, tried to convince himself it was all in his mind, yet he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The sensation was suffocating, pressing down on his chest. He glanced at the security monitors again, hoping for reassurance. But the cameras were no help. The hallways flickered on screen, black and white and grainy. Yet each feed showed faint, ghostly figures moving in impossible ways. One figure passed through walls, its outline blurred and wavering, as if reality itself had bent around it. Every time he tried to track it, it vanished from the screen, leaving only static and an unbearable silence that pressed against his ears. Suddenly, a low, guttural noise emerged from the far end of the lobby. It started as a whisper, almost indecipherable, and gradually grew into a soft, mocking laugh. The worker's stomach twisted. He tried to call out, but his voice felt trapped in his throat. The sound of footsteps echoed from every direction, sometimes behind him, sometimes ahead, but every time he spun around, no one was there. Even the front desk chair began to rock slightly, as though an unseen hand was nudging it back and forth. The worker felt panic rise, a raw, uncontainable terror that made his knees weak. The hotel was alive, breathing, and aware of him. He attempted to leave the lobby and reach the stairwell, but the door at the far end slammed shut with a deafening bang. His heart leapt into his throat. He tried the handle locked. The phone lines were still dead. Even the intercom, which should have called for help, emitted only static and faint whispers. The worker was trapped. The hotel, which had seemed like a place of work and routine just hours before, had transformed into something sinister, an entity that existed to torment. He realized with growing horror that this night was no ordinary shift, and every second stretched infinitely as the shadows moved closer, as if closing in to make sure he never left alive. The worker's breath came in short, ragged gasps. He had backed himself into the corner of the lobby, the shadows stretching along the walls like dark fingers reaching for him. The faint tapping of footsteps had returned, louder now, deliberate, circling him in ways that made no sense. He turned his head slowly and froze. At the far end of the hall stood a figure, barely visible in the flickering light. Tall, thin, with a face pale and hollow like the pages of an old photograph. The worker recognized him immediately. Though he had never seen him alive, the description matched the stories he had read online. This was the worker who had died during the hotel's construction. The figure moved closer without a sound. The worker tried to step back, but his legs felt like lead. Panic clawed at him, but the figure stopped just short of the lobby desk, tilting its head slightly, as if studying him. A cold wind swept through the room, carrying the faint scent of iron and dust. The front desk drawers rattled violently, pens and papers sliding across the surface. The worker's hands shook uncontrollably as he reached for the phone, but it was still dead. The room felt smaller, suffocating, the shadows around him thickening into dark shapes that writhed on the edges of his vision. The figure raised a hand slowly, pointing toward him. The worker's mind raced. Escape seemed impossible. He backed away, only to realize that the doors he had tried before were now locked, and the hallways had shifted subtly, confusing his sense of direction. He was trapped. The whispers returned, louder now, echoing from every corner. "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here." Each repetition sent shivers down his spine, and yet he couldn't tear his eyes from the figure that now stood motionless in the center of the lobby, its presence both terrifying and mesmerizing. Desperate, the worker remembered the old stories. Ghosts of this hotel often mirrored reality but existed in ways that cameras could not capture. He turned to check the monitors again, and on the screen the figure appeared multiple times in rooms and hallways where it couldn't possibly be. The worker realized that this wasn't a spirit bound to a single location. It was the hotel itself manifesting, using the ghost to enforce its presence. The figure stepped closer, and for a fleeting moment, the worker swore he could hear the sound of his own heartbeat, slow and irregular, synchronized with the rhythm of the unseen footsteps circling him. Fear consumed him entirely, as if the hotel had claimed him, body and soul, in that frozen, suffocating instant. The worker's mind raced, terror clawing at every thought. The figure remained still, watching him with those hollow, unblinking eyes, but now he noticed something even more unsettling. Behind the spectral worker, shadows twisted unnaturally, forming shapes that resembled the guests he had checked in earlier in the night. The faces were pale, blurred, and distorted. Their eyes seemed to follow him, but when he turned to look directly, they vanished, leaving only empty hallways in their place. The hotel had become a living nightmare, a place where reality bent and time lost all meaning. A sudden noise jolted him, a soft knock at the front door. The worker froze, heart hammering, certain that no one could enter. He approached cautiously, glancing at the figure and the writhing shadows behind it. The door creaked open on its own, and a man stepped inside. Tall, unassuming, with a calm smile that contrasted sharply with the fear gripping the worker. "I have a reservation," the man said quietly, holding out a card. The worker's stomach turned. He looked at the monitor, nothing. No one had entered. No doors had opened on camera. And the name on the card, it wasn't in the system. The truth hit him like a blow. Some guests in this hotel never existed. The man before him was one of them. The figures in the hallways, the shadows circling him, the cold, oppressive presence. It was all real. The hotel's past had bled into the present, and its victims, both living and dead, were trapped in its walls. The ghostly construction worker watched silently, his hollow eyes unchanging, as if acknowledging the worker understands. Every step he had taken that night had been observed, manipulated. The hotel had tested him, toyed with him, and revealed itself in fragments until this final, horrifying clarity. The worker felt the walls of the lobby close in, the shadows stretching further, and a low, guttural whisper echoed through the room. "You belong here now, just like the others." His breath quickened. Sweat poured down his face. The hotel had shown him what skepticism could not protect against. It was alive, it was patient, and it never forgot. Panic surged, and for a moment, he considered fleeing. But even the doors seemed to mock him, unyielding. He realized with a sinking certainty that the hotel's reality and the ghostly realm had merged, and he was caught between them, alone, powerless, and utterly exposed to the horrors it contained. The worker survived the night, though he scarcely knew how. By dawn, the shadows had receded, and the oppressive chill that had wrapped around the lobby seemed to lift slightly. The figure of the construction worker was gone, and the hallways appeared empty, as if nothing had happened. Yet the memory of the night clung to him like a second skin. Every creak of the old building, every flicker of light, and every distant whisper felt amplified. A constant reminder that the hotel was never truly empty. He had seen the impossible and lived to tell it, but living had not freed him. He tried to rationalize the events, telling himself it was exhaustion, stress, or his imagination playing tricks. But the security footage told a different story. When he reviewed it in daylight, the screens showed the hallway empty, doors closed, and the front desk undisturbed. No trace of the figures, no evidence of the guest who never existed, and no sign of the construction worker. The anomalies he had witnessed had vanished, leaving only silence, stillness, and a creeping, unshakable doubt in his mind. He realized that the hotel revealed only what it wanted, and some truths existed only for those who experienced them firsthand. He returned to work the next night, heart heavy, mind tense. The hotel appeared ordinary again, yet the lingering feeling of being watched never left. Sometimes, late at night, he would glance toward the lobby corners and catch fleeting shadows moving just out of sight. A faint whisper might brush against his ears when no one was near. The memory of that night, of faces that should not exist, of footsteps circling him, of the cold, hollow stare of the construction worker, remained vivid, haunting him long after the terror had passed. He had survived, but the hotel had left its mark, a permanent scar on his mind and soul. And even now, when the lights flicker in empty hallways or the front desk phone rings without cause, he knows the truth. The hotel is alive, patient, and watching. Some nights, it chooses to reveal its secrets. Other nights, it waits silently, letting the walls breathe, the shadows move, and the unseen guests wander freely. Those who think this story is just legend are wrong. The hotel exists and it remembers. It remembers everyone who enters, and some, perhaps, it never lets leave. Night shifts are supposed to be quiet, empty hallways, dark streets, and the soft hum of machines. Most people think these hours are just boring or lonely, but for some, night becomes something far darker. Ordinary places, the ones we walk through every day, can suddenly feel alive in the wrong way. Shadows seem heavier, sounds echo differently, and sometimes you're not alone, even when you are. Imagine walking through a warehouse. The lights flicker overhead, Everything is still. You hear nothing but your own footsteps and then, from the corner of your eye, movement. A shape, a figure. But when you turn, there's nothing. Yet the security cameras caught something human-like, but not human, and blue mist, moving slowly across the floor. You know it shouldn't be there. You shouldn't have seen it. And yet it's there every night. Or consider a hospital late at night. The elevators creak open. Empty. You step inside, and then you hear it. A whisper, soft and urgent, as if someone is asking you to stay. But no one is there. You check the cameras. Nothing. You hear footsteps in the hall, voices where there shouldn't be any. Over time, it happens again and again. Patterns form. You begin to realize these aren't random events. Something watches, waits, and moves when we are most vulnerable. These stories come from people who work the night shift. 26 workers from different places, warehouses, hospitals, oil refineries, have shared accounts of the same kind of unexplainable, terrifying events and glowing eyes in the woods. Misty figures on the grounds and shadows that appear and disappear. At first, you might think it's imagination. But when multiple people report the same things in different places over time, it becomes impossible to ignore. What makes it worse is the repetition. The sightings don't happen just once. They come night after night, always in places where people think they're safe. They come when no one else is around. They watch when the lights are off, the machines are silent, and the world seems empty. And yet, something is there waiting, following and observing. By the end of the night, the workers aren't just tired, they are terrified. Their workplaces, their routines, even the act of simply walking through an empty corridor, are no longer normal. Something has changed. The ordinary has become sinister. And for anyone who works late hours, anywhere, the question becomes unavoidable. What if the places you think are safe are silently watching you? The first set of reports comes from oil refineries. Vast complexes of pipes, tanks, and machinery stretch across acres of land. At night, these places are mostly empty, lit only by dim security lights. It should be peaceful or at least normal. But for some night shift workers, peace is the last thing they feel. Several workers have described seeing blue, misty figures gliding across the grounds. They aren't solid, not exactly human, but their shape is unmistakable, tall, thin and moving slowly. Sometimes they seem to pause, as if watching the cameras or the lone guard walking past. But when a worker approaches, the figure vanishes. It's never visible in person, only on surveillance footage. One worker, a night security guard named Mark, recalls an incident that still haunts him. He was making his routine patrol when the camera in the east section suddenly showed movement. A tall, misty figure drifted across the lot, hovering near the storage tanks. Mark walked toward the spot, flashlight in hand, expecting to see a trespasser or maybe an animal. Nothing. The lot was empty. Only the camera showed the figure, standing for a moment before fading into the shadows. He later reviewed the footage again and again. It was always there, always moving and always uncatchable. Others have reported similar experiences. Machines that should be silent hum louder when the figure appears. Lights flicker in rhythm with its movements. Alarms occasionally trigger for no reason. And when multiple cameras catch it at once, workers feel the impossible truth. They are not alone, and whatever this is, it doesn't want to be confronted. The strangest part is the repetition. These sightings are not one-time events. They occur night after night, sometimes in the same spots, sometimes roaming across different parts of the facility. Workers begin to memorize the paths of the blue figures, knowing where it might appear next. But no one dares approach too closely. The feeling of being watched grows stronger with each passing night. Fear starts to creep into daily routines. Guards double-check cameras before leaving posts. Workers avoid certain areas after dark. Even the most skeptical employees start to talk in whispers, sharing what they saw, validating one another's fears. It becomes clear. Something unknown, something that should not exist, is haunting these refineries. Something that can't be captured fully, something that cannot be explained. And yet, it is always there and waiting. Not all night shift horrors are confined to industrial grounds. Some appear in places that seem even more ordinary, like patrol paths running alongside forests, empty lots, or quiet back roads. Here, the fear takes on a more primal quality. It isn't just shapes or mist. It's eyes watching, waiting, and glowing eyes that pierces the darkness and refuse to blink. Multiple workers have reported the same phenomenon. 6 pairs of glowing eyes, staring silently from the trees, the brush, or the edge of a dimly lit path. They are perfectly still, yet always there, appearing at the exact moment someone is walking alone. The first sighting usually sparks disbelief. You slow down, telling yourself it's a reflection, an animal, maybe a trick of the light. But then it happens again and again. The eyes never leave. One security patrol worker, Liam, recalls a terrifying night when he was walking along a forested path beside a refinery. The only light came from his flashlight, flickering against the trees. He suddenly froze 6 glowing points, perfectly aligned, staring straight at him. He called out, hoping to startle whatever it was. Nothing. Not a sound. No movement, and only the eyes, burning in the darkness. When he turned on his radio to report it, the eyes vanished, like they were never there at all. Other night shift employees have described hearing whispers in the dark, soft footsteps, or the faint rustle of leaves, yet no one is ever visible. The sense of being stalked grows as the sightings repeat. It's not random. The eyes always appear at night, always when the worker is alone. The forest seems alive in ways that defy logic, holding secrets just beyond human understanding. The repetition of the phenomenon drives a creeping terror. Workers begin to dread routine patrols. Even familiar paths become dangerous once the eyes appear. Some have claimed to see the figures shift slightly between nights, as if learning, waiting, observing patterns. There is an unspoken rule among them. Never acknowledge the eyes, never approach, never look away, because once they've noticed you, the sense of being hunted becomes unbearable. And the most unnerving part? These sightings often happen near the same paths where blue misty figures were reported on the refinery grounds. The boundary between ordinary and supernatural starts to blur. What starts as a simple walk in the dark can turn into a confrontation with something ancient, patient, and impossible to fight. The eyes are a reminder that some dangers aren't meant to be faced. They are meant to be survived. Hospitals are meant to be places of care and safety. But when the night falls and the corridors empty, even these familiar places can become frightening. Several night shift workers have shared reports of voices, footsteps, and shadowy figures in areas that should be completely deserted. What makes it creepier is that no one is ever visible. Sometimes the activity is only caught in fleeting glimpses, or on CCTV that records more than the human eye can see. Nurses and security staff describe entering elevators that seem ordinary at first. The doors close behind them, the floor lights flash, and then a whisper. Not a voice over the intercom, not a coworker talking. An actual voice, soft and urgent, as if someone is asking for help or trying to communicate something impossible to hear clearly. Some swear the elevator stops on floors where nobody pressed the button, only to open and reveal nothing but empty hallways. One night, a nurse named Emily recalls the chills running down her spine as she made her rounds. She saw a faint figure at the far end of a hallway, tall, shadowy, almost translucent. She blinked, and it was gone. Later, reviewing CCTV, the figure appears again, walking past a wall that should have blocked her entirely. No doors were open. No one else was inside. Yet the figure moved with purpose, calm and silent, as if it belonged there, even though it shouldn't. The sounds are often just as unsettling as the sightings. Footsteps echo in empty corridors, soft clicks that seem to follow workers from room to room. Doors that were shut appear slightly ajar. Sometimes, machines beep unexpectedly or alarms sound with no cause. Workers quickly learn to ignore them, or at least try, because acknowledging them seems to make the presence stronger, closer. What makes these haunting terrifying is their repetition. One worker sees the same figure at roughly the same time every week. Another hears the same whisper repeatedly in the same elevator. The hospital becomes a place where the ordinary rules no longer apply. Staff begin to alter their routines, avoid certain elevators, and hesitate before walking alone. Fear doesn't just stay in the mind. It becomes a tangible, creeping presence, turning familiar spaces into arenas of unseen terror. The invisible passengers aren't aggressive, they don't harm. But the terror comes from knowing they are there, repeating the same actions, moving in the same patterns, appearing exactly when you are most vulnerable. They are reminders that the world we think we understand is only partially visible. And for those working nights, every hallway, every elevator, every shadow might hide something that is waiting, always watching, always silent until noticed. At first, most night shift workers try to rationalize what they see. A shadow, a trick of the light, fatigue, or imagination. But when the incidents repeat and repeat in the same way, there's no explanation left that feels safe. The blue misty figures at the refinery, the glowing eyes in the woods, the shadowy figures in hospital corridors. They aren't isolated. They follow patterns, appear in predictable ways, and often emerge when workers are alone. Several employees have noticed that these sightings happen at roughly the same times each night. A misty figure may drift across the refinery grounds at exactly 2:15 a.m., lingering near the same tanks or doors. The glowing eyes always appear along the patrol path at roughly the same stretch of trees. In hospitals, the whispers, footsteps, and figures show up in the same elevators and hallways, sometimes as if keeping watch over the workers. The recurrence isn't comforting, it's terrifying, because it shows intent. One security officer, Sarah, recalls reviewing footage from different nights. She noticed a pattern in the blue misty figures' movements. They were not random. They appeared to follow a route, almost like someone or something was walking the grounds with purpose, carefully avoiding detection but still present, always observing. On some nights, the misty figure would pause at the same spot it had paused before, almost as if it remembered, almost as if it was aware of being watched in return. Even more unsettling are the reports that the different phenomena seem connected. Workers who experience glowing eyes in the woods sometimes report hearing faint whispers reminiscent of the hospital haunting. Some of the misty figures on camera appear to move toward the edges of nearby wooded areas, as if linking the refinery and the forest together. It's as if all these ordinary, everyday places, refineries, patrol paths, hospitals, are connected by unseen forces, quietly repeating the same behaviors for weeks, months, even years. The psychological effect on the workers is undeniable. They start to anticipate the patterns. Fear becomes predictable. Anxiety builds in rhythm with the night. Even when a night seems uneventful, the memory of previous occurrences lingers, making each sound, shadow, or flicker of light feel like the start of another encounter. The repetitive nature makes the unknown feel inevitable, inescapable. You start to realize that the ordinary world is only partly safe. There are elements beyond understanding, silently rehearsing their presence around you, night after night, waiting for you to notice. Repeated encounters with the unexplained don't just scare people. They change them. For night shift workers, fear seeps into every part of life, long after the shift ends. Sleep becomes uneasy. Every shadow, every sound, even in daylight, carries the memory of the figures, the eyes, the whispers. The mind starts replaying every detail over and over, searching for explanations that never come. Workers describe a creeping anxiety that grows with each sighting. Mark, the refinery guard, says he now hesitates before stepping into any area at night, even familiar ones. The blue mist, the glowing eyes, and the hospital shadows have taught him that safety is an illusion. Liam, the forest patrol worker, admits he can no longer take the same path alone. Even when he sees nothing, he feels watched, as if the eyes have memorized his routine and are waiting for the perfect moment to appear again. The toll isn't just mental, it affects behavior. Employees avoid certain sections of refineries or hospitals. They adjust shifts to avoid nighttime patrols. Some even quit their jobs entirely, unable to bear the constant pressure of unseen watchers. The repetitive nature of the sightings makes the fear cumulative. The first encounter might shock, but by the 5th or 10th, the terror becomes relentless, as if the environment itself is conspiring to wear them down. Sleep deprivation and hypervigilance begin to blur reality. Workers report hearing footsteps, whispers, or seeing movements even during the day, when everything should be normal. Simple sounds, a creaking door, a flickering light, a rustle outside, trigger the memory of nights spent with unseen presences. What was once a mundane workplace becomes a place of tension, paranoia, and helplessness. Some workers even describe physical reactions: heart racing, sudden chills, a feeling of being touched by invisible hands. These sensations leave a deep impression, making every return to the night shift feel like stepping back into a trap. Over time, the cumulative effect is almost supernatural in itself. Even the bravest employee begins to feel that the night belongs not to humans, but to these unseen figures, the watchers that have quietly observed, repeated, and learned every routine. The psychological toll proves one chilling truth: the phenomena are more than just visual or auditory illusions. They are experienced, remembered, and anticipated. Fear becomes a constant companion, and ordinary places, warehouses, forests, hospitals, are never just ordinary again. Something unknown watches, waits, and repeats. And for those who work nights, every encounter is a reminder that the world we think we control is full of unseen observers, always present, always patient, always watching. Even after all the stories, the reports, and the repeated sightings, one fact remains undeniable: these horrors could happen anywhere. Warehouses, forests, hospitals, ordinary places we walk through every day are not as safe as we believe. The blue mist, the glowing eyes, the shadowy figures. These are not confined to one building or one night shift. They follow patterns, learn routines, and appear where they choose. And they are patient. For the night shift workers who have experienced them, the fear doesn't end when the shift does. Some say the figures haunt their dreams. Others hear whispers when they are alone at home. Even ordinary objects, a streetlight, a corner of a hallway, a patch of darkness in the parking lot, can trigger memories of being watched. The world becomes layered. One layer familiar, the other entirely unknown and dangerous. And what's perhaps most terrifying is the realization that these watchers aren't aggressive. They don't attack. They don't announce themselves. Yet their presence is enough to make a person rethink every step they take at night. Their patience is a kind of horror in itself. They can observe for years without interference, letting the fear grow, letting it settle in the mind until it becomes part of reality. The stories of the 26 night shift workers are chilling reminders of what lies just beyond perception. Figures seen only on cameras, eyes glowing in the woods, voices echoing in elevators. All proof that some places, some nights, are inhabited by forces we cannot understand. They repeat, they watch, and they exist in the spaces we think are safe. So the next time you walk a quiet hallway, pass through a dimly lit parking lot, or work alone in a familiar place at night, remember this: the unseen may already be there waiting, observing, and learning. And when you think no one is around, that's exactly when you are most vulnerable, because the ordinary world can hide the extraordinary horror, and the watchers are always patient, always silent, and always nearby. The night was quiet, almost too quiet. The rural hospital sat alone, surrounded by dark fields, with only the faint glow of its windows cutting through the darkness. The nurse's car rolled into the empty parking lot, its headlights briefly illuminating the long, silent driveway. She had worked this shift countless times, but tonight felt different. Heavier somehow, like the air itself was holding its breath. Inside, the hallways were eerily still. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead was the only sound, accompanied by the occasional beep of a far-off monitor. She adjusted her uniform and took a deep breath, telling herself it was just another normal night. Then she heard it, and a soft whisper, almost like someone calling her name from the end of the corridor. Her steps froze. "Hello?" she called, her voice echoing unnaturally in the empty hall. The silence answered back no one. The shadows seemed to shift around her, stretching and bending in ways that made her heart race. She shook her head, blaming the whisper on exhaustion. The night shift was long, and her body was tired, her mind strained from endless paperwork and constant vigilance. But the feeling in the pit of her stomach refused to leave. Something was off, and she couldn't ignore it. As she walked toward the nurse's station, the whisper came again, softer this time, almost right beside her ear. She spun around, but no one was there. The hallway stretched on endlessly, empty and still. The doors along the corridor, which she knew she had checked and locked earlier, were now slightly ajar. A cold draft brushed her arm as if someone had passed by, yet the hall remained empty. She told herself it was fatigue, a trick of the mind. But deep down, an unsettling truth began to creep in. The silence was not ordinary, and tonight, the hospital felt alive in ways she could not explain. Her steps quickened, the echo of her shoes sounding unnaturally loud in the empty hall. Each flicker of the overhead lights made her glance toward the shadows, expecting to see something or someone, standing just out of sight. The air felt thick, almost heavy, pressing against her skin. Something about the stillness made her pulse pound. And then, just as she reached the nurse's station, a faint sigh echoed through the hallway, not from a human throat, but from the building itself. She froze again. Her instincts screamed at her to leave, but curiosity and duty rooted her in place. That night, the boundary between the living and the unseen felt thinner than ever, and a chill ran down her spine that would not fade. As the night stretched on, the nurse tried to focus on her routine tasks, hoping that keeping busy would calm her nerves. She checked patient charts, restocked supplies, and made her rounds. But no matter what she did, the feeling of being watched refused to leave. Every time she glanced down a hallway, shadows seemed to linger just a moment too long, bending at angles that didn't make sense. She told herself it was exhaustion, the long hours playing tricks on her mind. Yet, deep inside, a creeping unease told her it was something far more sinister. The first undeniable sign came with a sound. A soft tapping, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from a room she had passed just minutes before. She paused, heart racing, straining to listen. The tapping stopped. She stepped closer to the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. The door was locked, exactly as she had left it. She shook her head and forced a laugh, muttering under her breath about being jumpy after too many sleepless nights. But the air around her felt colder now, heavier, as if the walls themselves were breathing. Then, she noticed its small, subtle changes that made her pulse spike. A chair slightly moved from where she remembered placing it. A clipboard, which she had meticulously organized hours ago, lay askew on a counter. The flickering fluorescent lights overhead seemed to cast shadows that shifted independently, stretching across the floor like living things. The whispers returned, faint at first, almost teasing her from the corners of her hearing, only to vanish when she turned her head. It wasn't just her imagination. Something was here, and it was moving with her, observing her every step. As she walked the long corridor to check on a patient, the temperature dropped sharply. Her breath fogged in the air, even though the hospital's heating system was on full. Then she saw it, a fleeting shadow darting just past the corner of her eye. She froze. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her training forced her forward. The hallway, which should have felt familiar and safe, now felt like a maze where every corner might hide a presence. With each step, her mind wrestled with doubt. Was she truly seeing something? Or was this the cruel trick of an overworked, tired mind? The hospital, empty and silent by day, had become a place where reality and fear blurred, and every whisper, shadow, and flicker felt like a warning. By the time she reached the end of the hall, the whispers grew louder, almost forming words she couldn't quite understand. The figure that had been flickering in and out of sight seemed to press closer with each heartbeat. And in that moment, she realized she wasn't just tired or paranoid. The night was alive with something she couldn't explain, and she was trapped in its invisible gaze. The nurse's footsteps echoed unnaturally loud in the empty corridor, each tap against the linoleum floor feeling like a countdown. The whispering had stopped for a moment, leaving an eerie silence that pressed against her ears. Then, from the far end of the hall, she saw it, a figure. It was faint, almost translucent, standing perfectly still just beyond the glow of the flickering lights. Her heart skipped. She blinked, hoping it was a trick of her eyes, a shadow cast by the overhead lights, but the figure remained. It was human-shaped, yet indistinct. She couldn't see features clearly, only the outline of a person. Her instincts screamed at her to retreat, but a strange pull made her move closer, curiosity battling terror. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling despite her best effort to stay calm. The figure didn't respond. She took another step, and it shifted slightly, as if it had been waiting for her to notice. The hallway felt colder now, her breath forming little clouds in front of her. Her pulse pounded in her ears, each beat a loud drum of fear. She moved cautiously, hand outstretched, yet the figure vanished the instant she drew near. 1 second it was there, the next nothing. The silence that followed was suffocating. She spun around, scanning every corner, but the hall remained empty, eerily quiet. Her chest heaved as adrenaline surged through her veins. Was it exhaustion? A hallucination brought on by sleepless nights? She wanted to believe so, but her instincts screamed otherwise. Something had been there, something that wasn't bound by the rules of the living world. The nurse tried to steady herself, leaning against a wall, telling herself to breathe. But the whispers returned, more insistent now, almost circling her like unseen fingers tracing the air. Doors creaked open by themselves, a clipboard toppled again, and she felt a presence behind her, moving silently, staying just out of reach. Panic surged, yet she forced herself forward. There was no ignoring it. The figure, the whispers, the cold pressing in from all sides. This was no ordinary night. The thin boundary between life and whatever lingered in these halls had been breached, and she was painfully aware of it. Every instinct screamed for her to run, yet the nurse's training kept her moving, her flashlight slicing through the shadows. She couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her, of being followed without seeing who or what was pursuing her. Every flicker of light, every whisper, every shadow made her question reality. The hospital she had known all her life had transformed into a labyrinth of fear, where the living and the dead seemed to walk side by side. And for the first time, she understood. Exhaustion alone could not explain what she had seen. By now, the nurse's nerves were frayed, every sound amplified in the hollow silence of the hospital. She moved cautiously down another corridor, flashlight trembling in her hand. The whispers had returned, this time clearer, carrying words that made no sense. Soft, pleading murmurs, almost human, yet distorted, as if coming from far away. She spun around, scanning the walls and corners, but the hall remained empty. Her pulse raced, adrenaline's making her fingers shake. The air was thick, heavy, like it was pushing against her chest. Every instinct told her to run, but she had patience to check on, and she couldn't abandon them, no matter how terrifying the night had become. Then she noticed the small anomalies. A chair she had left perfectly aligned now faced the wall. A clipboard that had been stacked neatly lay scattered on the floor. Her mind scrambled to explain it. Drafts from an old air vent? The hospital settling? Yet she knew the building too well. These were deliberate movements impossible for the wind or her imagination alone. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, bending in ways that made her stomach twist. The whispers seemed to circle her now, sometimes from the ceiling, sometimes from under the doors. She could feel the presence close, just beyond sight, following every step she took. Her breathing became shallow as the cold pressed in even more, seeping through her uniform, chilling her bones. The hallway lights flickered, plunging the corridor into darkness for brief, disorienting moments. During one of these flickers, she thought she saw movement in the corner of her eye, a figure leaning against a doorway watching. When the lights returned, it was gone. A low, almost inaudible sigh drifted across the hall, brushing past her like a cold hand. She realized she wasn't imagining the sounds or the shadows. Something was in the hospital with her, unseen yet unmistakably present. Fear clawed at her mind as the environment itself seemed to betray her senses. Doors creaked open slowly, then slammed shut without warning. A distant monitor beeped erratically, though no patient was connected. The whispers became more insistent, forming fragments of phrases she couldn't quite grasp. "Leave now. Don't go." The hospital felt alive, sentient, aware of her every movement. Her legs wanted to run, yet her training forced her to keep moving, checking each room as she went. Every step intensified the feeling of eyes upon her, a malevolent curiosity that made her skin crawl. By the time she reached the end of the corridor, she was trembling uncontrollably, flashlight shaking in her hand. The whispers had stopped for a moment, replaced by silence so thick it pressed into her ears. And then, a single object, a clipboard, slid slowly across the floor toward her, as if pushed by invisible fingers. Her heart leapt into her throat. She stepped back, realizing with growing horror that she was no longer in control of the space around her. The hospital, once a place of routine and care, had become a labyrinth of fear. The line between the living and the unseen had blurred, and she was trapped inside, caught between exhaustion and terror, reality and something far darker. The nurse's pulse pounded in her ears as she forced herself to keep moving, each step feeling heavier than the last. The hallway seemed endless, stretching into darkness with no relief. Then, she felt it, an almost tangible pressure in the air, as if someone or something was standing right behind her. She spun around, but the corridor was empty. Her flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the linoleum floor and the walls, but nothing moved. Yet, she knew she wasn't alone. Then, it appeared, and the figure from before, this time closer, almost within reach. It was faint and shadowed, more human than before, but its presence radiated a cold, malevolent energy that made her blood run ice-cold. Her breath hitched, and her hands trembled violently. She wanted to scream, but her voice stuck in her throat. The figure remained perfectly still, almost watching, its outline flickering with the weak overhead lights. Time seemed to stretch, each second dragging on like an eternity. She had never felt such an oppressive, unnatural force pressing down on her. She took a cautious step forward, drawn by a mix of fear and disbelief. "Who are you?" she whispered, barely audible. The figure didn't respond, but a low, guttural sound, half whisper, half growl, vibrated through the corridor. The lights flickered violently, plunging her into momentary darkness. When they returned, the figure had shifted, closer than before, yet it still had no clear features, no identifiable face. Its presence was unmistakable, alive with something that was not human. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs refused to obey. Suddenly, it vanished, leaving a vacuum of silence so intense it hurt her ears. The cold lingered, clinging to her skin like icy fingers, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer, darker. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her own feet, her flashlight shaking wildly. Her heart raced, chest heaving as adrenaline surged through her. She realized, with dawning horror, that this was no hallucination, no trick of fatigue. Something truly supernatural had crossed into her world, and she had come face to face with it. Even as she tried to calm herself, the figure reappeared in the corner of her vision, flickering in and out like smoke. Whispers returned, fragmented and urgent. Leave now." The hospital, once familiar and mundane, had become a trap of shadows and unseen watchers. The nurse's mind raced. Was this result of exhaustion? Or had she stepped into a realm where the living and the dead blurred, and the boundary that separated them had grown impossibly thin? Her fear was no longer abstract. It was immediate, palpable, and terrifyingly real. After the terrifying encounter, the nurse stumbled toward the nurse's station, her hands shaking and breathe uneven. She knew she couldn't ignore what was happening anymore. Something in this hospital was not just playing tricks on her mind. Her eyes fell on a stack of old patient files tucked away in a dusty cabinet she had never needed to check before. Something compelled her to open them. The first folder revealed a patient who had died under mysterious circumstances decades ago, their records incomplete and oddly cryptic. The next folder told of a young nurse who vanished without explanation during a night shift, her disappearance never solved. As she read, a chilling pattern emerged. The whispers, the shadows, the flickering figure. They all seemed tied to past tragedies in the hospital. Each haunting occurrence mirrored the fear and suffering of those who had come before, and the air around her thickened, almost pulsing with unseen energy, as if the hospital itself were alive with memory. Every creak, every flicker of light now carried weight, a story trapped in the walls. She realized that the spirits were not random. They were echoes of unresolved pain, clinging to the place where their lives had ended abruptly. The nurse's mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Exhaustion could no longer explain the cold fingers of fear creeping down her spine, or the figure that seemed to appear at will. The hospital, she understood now, was a thin veil separating the living from the dead. That night, the boundary had become almost imperceptible. She felt the weight of countless unseen eyes, the silent gazes of those who had suffered here, their presence pressing into her consciousness. Fear mingled with a strange empathy. She wasn't just afraid. She felt the lingering sorrow, the unanswered questions, and the trapped anguish that had never been released. Suddenly, a cold draft swept through the hallway, scattering papers across the floor. The figure appeared again at the end of the hall, flickering in the dim light. But this time, it seemed less threatening, more like a lost soul seeking acknowledgement. The whispers were clearer now, almost coherent. "Help, remember. Don't forget." The nurse understood. The haunting were a cry, a plea from those who had suffered here, begging for recognition, for someone to see them, even decades later. Her fear remained, but it was now tempered with a heavy, solemn understanding. The hospital was not merely haunted. It was a repository of lost memories, a place where the living and dead brushed against one another in the stillness of night. As she steadied herself against the wall, the nurse realized that her night had changed her forever. The events she had witnessed were real, undeniable, and inescapable. The hospital's past had reached out to her, blurring the lines between life and death, and leaving her with a chilling awareness. Some places carry the weight of memory so strongly, it can reach across decades, touching those who walk their halls long after tragedy has occurred. And that night, in those echoing corridors, she had become a witness to something far greater and far more terrifying than she could have imagined. The nurse took a shaky step toward the exit, thinking the night was finally over. Her uniform clung to her skin from sweat, and her hands trembled uncontrollably. Yet, even as she reached the hospital doors, the feeling of being watched refused to leave. The air seemed heavier here, thick with the weight of unseen eyes and whispered warnings. Every instinct screamed that she had survived something far beyond ordinary fear, but she could not shake the sensation that the night was not finished with her. As she pushed open the doors, the cold night air rushed in, biting through her exhaustion. For a moment she thought she was free. The parking lot was empty, the fields dark and silent. She exhaled, trying to calm herself, convincing her mind that what she had experienced was tied to fatigue and stress. But then, from the corner of her vision, a shadow flickered across the lot. Her heart lurched. She turned, flashlight raised instinctively, but nothing stood there. Only darkness stretching endlessly. A whisper followed her outside, carried by the cold wind, soft yet unmistakable. "We're still here." The hairs on her arms stood on end. The hospital's silhouette loomed behind her. Windows dark but somehow alive, holding secrets that would never fully leave her mind. She felt it. The boundary between the living and the dead was still thin, still fragile, and the echoes of the past had not yet let her go. Every rational thought fought to dismiss it, yet deep down, she knew she had glimpsed something real, something eternal. As she climbed into her car, hands trembling on the steering wheel, the whispers returned one last time, urgent and chilling. "Don't forget us." She started the engine, headlights piercing the darkness, but in the rearview mirror, she thought she saw the faint outline of the figure standing at the edge of the parking lot, watching. Then it vanished, as if swallowed by the night itself. Even as she drove away, The nurse could feel the echo of the hospital's halls lingering inside her mind. The cold, the whispers, and the invisible presence that had touched her life in ways she could never forget. That night had changed everything. The living and the dead had brushed shoulders in those corridors, and she had been a witness. And somewhere, deep in the quiet fields surrounding the hospital, the unseen watchers waited patiently, knowing their echoes would never truly fade.